Chapter 1. Arrival. The massive colony ship Endeavour hummed with life, a self-contained world drifting through the void. It had been nearly 6 standard months since it touched down on Corva 7, a lush and untamed world teeming with exotic flora and fauna. The settlement was growing, its inhabitants a mix of scientists, engineers and military personnel. Among them was Dr. Elias Carter, a xenobiologist with a fascination for alien life, and the only human who had shown any interest in the newest addition to the colony, a disabled Corvan woman named Shiara. Shiara was unlike any of her kind that Elias had encountered before. Corvans were typically tall, sleek and graceful, their bioluminescent skin shifting colors with their emotions. But Shiara's movements were hesitant, her right leg partially atrophied, and her lower left arm missing from an injury she refused to speak about. The other Corvans avoided her and the humans followed suit, wary of engaging with someone even the native inhabitants shunned. Elias had always believed that understanding alien cultures required breaking down barriers, not reinforcing them. Yet despite his attempts, Shiara remained distant, wary of him just as much as she was of everyone else. It wasn't until one quiet evening as Elias catalogued samples near the colony's perimeter, that she approached him. Her bioluminescence flickered with uncertainty. "Human," she spoke in a halting but deliberate voice. "Why do you watch me?" Elias set down his datapad, surprised by her directness. "Because I want to understand. Your people avoid you, but that doesn't mean you deserve to be alone." Shiara studied him, her luminous eyes searching his face for deception. "You are different," he shrugged. "I like to think that's a good thing." She hesitated before sitting down across from him, wincing slightly as she adjusted her weight. Elias noticed but said nothing. If she wanted to share her story, she would do so in her own time. That night marked the beginning of something neither of them fully understood, a fragile connection between two outsiders, a human and a Corvan who had both been cast aside in their own ways. Chapter 2. Isolation and Understanding. Days passed, then weeks. Shiara kept her distance from the other colonists, preferring the wilderness beyond the settlement's borders. Elias, however, refused to let their initial conversation be the last. He sought her out when he could, bringing her small gifts, a book with translated Corvan poetry, a scarf woven from local fibers, even a carefully reconstructed data file of what little human history he thought she might find interesting. At first she accepted them with suspicion, as if expecting a cruel joke. But Elias was patient. He asked questions about her world, about the plants and creatures that no human had yet studied. Slowly Shiara began to speak. "My people do not bond with those who are broken." Her voice was quiet as they sat by a river, watching the twin moons rise. "I was strong once. A hunter. Then I was taken." Elias waited, sensing the weight of her words. "The war," she continued. "You know of it?" He nodded. The conflict between the Corvans and the enigmatic Vesh was well documented, though few humans had been directly involved. "I was captured. Held in darkness. When I returned, I was not whole." She gestured to her missing limb, to the scars along her side. "They say I am unfit. That I bring shame." Elias clenched his fists. "That's not right. You survived." She turned to him, her eyes glowing softly. "And what of you, human? Why do you seek me out when your own kind do not?" He hesitated before answering. "Because I know what it's like to be on the outside looking in." For the first time Shiara's expression softened. A flicker of understanding passed between them, unspoken but undeniable. From that night on their bond only grew stronger. Chapter 3. A Fragile Connection. The space station's artificial morning cycle bathed the corridors in a soft golden glow. Leon adjusted the strap of his utility belt as he made his way toward the research wing, his mind still processing the previous evening's encounter with Varel. The alien woman, rejected by all, had shown a hesitant flicker of trust toward him. It was a fragile thing, like a sapling fighting against the storm. As he reached the medical bay, Dr. Lenton greeted him with a nod. "Back to see Varel?" Leon sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah. I think we made progress yesterday." Dr. Lenton tapped a few keys on the holo display, bringing up Varel's medical scans. "Her condition remains stable. Physically, she's stronger than she looks, but her neurological activity suggests chronic stress. I'd advise patience." Leon nodded and entered the room. Varel was perched on the edge of the examination table, her violet-hued fingers toying with the hem of her robe. Her dark eyes flickered to him before darting away. "Morning, Wool," Leon said, keeping his voice even. He didn't expect a response. He just wanted her to get used to his presence. She tilted her head slightly but said nothing. Instead, she reached for a small communication slate that translated her alien script into galactic standard. Slowly she typed, "Why are you here?" Leon sat on the chair across from her. "Because I want to be." She stared at him for a long moment before typing again. "They told me humans bond easily. Why did no one else want me?" His gut twisted. People can be cruel. They fear what they don't understand. She considered his words, then typed something unexpected. "Do you fear me?" Leon leaned forward slightly. "No." "Do you fear me?" Varel hesitated, then shook her head. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Chapter 4. The Bridge Between Worlds. Days turned into weeks. Varel remained withdrawn but allowed Leon to spend time with her. He brought small comforts, books translated into her language, a soft blanket that matched the colors of her homeworld sky, and a tiny holographic projector that displayed the nebulae surrounding the station. One evening, as Leon adjusted the device, Varel reached out a hand, her fingers brushing his wrist. It was the first time she had initiated contact. He held still, watching as she studied the roughness of his skin. Then she withdrew, fingers twitching as though unsure of her own actions. Leon smiled. "It's okay. I don't mind." She hesitated before tapping on her communicator. "Your skin is different. Warm. Rough. Human." He chuckled. "Yeah, I guess we are pretty different." Varel looked at her own hands, then at him. After a pause she typed, "Different but not alone." Leon's breath caught. It was the closest thing to an admission of trust he'd received from her. He nodded. "Yeah. Not alone." Outside the station's observation window, stars burned in the distance, silent witnesses to the forming bond between a human and the alien woman no one else would accept. Chapter 5. A Fragile Alliance. The deep hum of the space station resonated through the metallic corridors as Ivanka adjusted her exoskeletal support frame. She was accustomed to the stares of others, the whispers behind her back, and the way entire groups seemed to pretend she didn't exist. It had been like that since she arrived on the Orion outpost, a place meant to represent interspecies unity, except it seemed for those who didn't fit the mold. The only exception was Daniel Carter. Daniel had spent weeks breaking through her carefully built walls. Where others saw weakness in her fragile limbs, he saw perseverance. Where others recoiled at the sight of her pale, ridged skin and large silver eyes, he marveled at the unique beauty of her people, the Villarin. And so, despite every instinct screaming at her to remain distant, she found herself accepting his company more and more. "Hey Ivanka," Daniel called, jogging up to her. His grin was infectious, and she felt an unfamiliar warmth in her chest at the sight of it. "Daniel," she greeted, her voice a melodic whisper. "What do you need?" "More like what do you need?" He gestured toward the small datapad she clutched in her three-fingered hands. "You look like you're heading somewhere important." Ivanka hesitated before responding. "The council requested my presence. I assume it's about the recent sabotage attempt." Daniel frowned. "They're blaming you?" She exhaled. "They will not say it outright. But my presence is always questioned in times of misfortune." His jaw clenched. "That's ridiculous. You've done nothing but try to prove yourself." She turned to him, meeting his gaze. "That is not always enough." He nodded solemnly. "Then let's make it enough. I'll come with you." And for the first time in a long time, Ivanka wasn't alone. Chapter 6. The Accusation. The council chamber was a circular room lined with towering figures from various species. The tension was palpable as Ivanka stepped inside, Daniel close beside her. "Ivanka of the Villarin," a deep voice boomed. It belonged to Commander Vethel, a reptilian Brachian whose piercing yellow eyes bored into her. "Do you know why you have been summoned?" "I assume it concerns the sabotage of the agricultural biodomes," she answered evenly. A tall, insectoid ambassador clicked its mandibles. "Indeed. We have reviewed the security footage. And while no direct evidence points to you, there are concerns." Daniel scoffed. "Concerns? She's been nothing but loyal to this station." A sleek, feline-like Crawley representative flicked her tail. "And yet the attack happened within an area only she and a few others had access to." Ivanka took a breath. If you believe I am responsible, show your proof. Silence. Because they had none. After a tense pause, Vethel rumbled. Until we uncover the true culprit, we ask that you refrain from accessing restricted zones. Ivanka clenched her fists but nodded. Understood. As she turned to leave, Daniel leaned in and whispered, "We'll find the real saboteur." And with that promise, hope sparked within her once more. Chapter 7. The Rift and the Connection. The tension aboard the Starship Horizon had reached a breaking point. Zyra, the disabled alien woman from the peaceful yet misunderstood Kalari species, had spent months enduring the cold distance of her fellow crew members. Despite her advanced intellect and empathic abilities, her physical limitations, a weakened respiratory system that required an exosuit and a genetic anomaly that rendered her unable to vocalize in the standard intergalactic language, had made her a pariah. Except for Lieutenant Jason Carter, the lone human on the crew, who had chosen to look beyond her perceived weaknesses. He had seen the brilliance in her, the depth of her emotions, and the strength that went beyond the limitations of her body. Their bond had grown, carefully and deliberately, over shared conversations through holoscripts and gestures, an understanding that transcended words. But now that fragile bond was under threat. A distress call had been intercepted from the Lurvani Expanse, a volatile region notorious for its spatial anomalies. The ship's captain, Commander Vulek, a rigid traditionalist, was hesitant to allow Zyra to participate in the mission, citing her compromised state. Zyra's crest of bioluminescent tendrils flickered in frustration as she tapped out her response on her interface. My knowledge of quantum field stabilization is essential. If we attempt this without my guidance, we risk collapse. Jason stood beside her, his jaw clenched. She's right, sir. We need every advantage we can get, and she understands these anomalies better than anyone here. Vulek's secondary eyelids flickered in irritation. Lieutenant, your insistence on championing this outsider is admirable but misplaced. The rest of the crew does not trust her to act in their best interests. Then they're fools, Jason snapped. Because if they took 5 minutes to listen to her instead of judging, they'd realize she's been trying to save all our lives since the moment she got here. Zyra reached out, placing a gentle hand on Jason's arm. Her fingers, delicate and cool, pulsed faintly with a bioluminescent glow. She shook her head slightly, her way of telling him not to fight her battles for her. Vulek exhaled sharply but relented. Fine. She will assist. But if anything goes wrong, the blame is on you, Lieutenant. Jason glanced at Zyra, a silent understanding passing between them. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. Chapter 8. Into the Storm. The Lurvani Expanse loomed before them, an endless cascade of warping light and shadow, where time itself seemed to distort. As the ship's sensors struggled to make sense of the space ahead, Zyra worked furiously, her fingers gliding across the holographic controls in her personal workstation. Jason stood close by, monitoring the crew's reactions as she inputted calculations at a speed none of them could match. Entering the anomaly in 3 minutes, the helmsman announced, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Vulek's mandibles twitched. Zyra, explain what we're dealing with. She tapped her communicator, sending a direct translation to the ship's speakers. The Expanse is an unstable gravity field, laced with quantum fractures. If we miscalculate, we will be scattered across different temporal points, unable to return. We must adjust our trajectory at the precise moment I indicate. A murmur of skepticism ran through the crew, but Jason shot them a warning glare. You heard her. We follow her lead. The ship trembled as they breached the Expanse. The view outside shifted wildly, stars twisting into impossible spirals. The gravitational pressure slammed against the hull, sending warning alarms blaring. Zyra's tendrils flared with urgent signals as she typed furiously. Compensating for quantum drift. Adjust starboard vectors by 0.3 degrees. Jason relayed the command. You heard her. Do it now. The ship lurched, and for a moment, it felt as if they would be ripped apart. Then just as suddenly the pressure ceased. The screen stabilized, revealing a tranquil core within the storm, a safe passage. Vulek stared at the readings, then at Zyra. That was effective. Jason smirked. Yeah. No kidding. For the first time, some of the crew exchanged glances of begrudging respect. Zyra lowered her hands, exhaustion evident in her posture, but her eyes glowed with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had finally been seen. The battle wasn't over, but the tides were shifting. And for the first time since she had boarded the Starship Horizon, Zyra wasn't alone. Chapter 9. A World Between Stars. The ship hummed quietly as Ethan leaned against the viewport, staring at the sprawling nebula outside. The endless hues of violet and deep indigo reflected the turmoil inside him. Behind him, Soraya sat, her posture rigid, her elongated fingers fidgeting on the fabric of her robe. "You are quiet tonight," she murmured. Her voice carried the weight of someone who had grown used to silence, to rejection. Ethan turned, offering a tired smile. "Just thinking. The crew still won't talk to you, huh?" Soraya's bioluminescent eyes dimmed slightly. "No. They find me inconvenient." His jaw tightened. "That's not right. You saved their lives back on Vecranes for..." She exhaled, her respiratory gills fluttering slightly. "Gratitude does not erase fear." Ethan sighed and sat beside her, the bench creaking under his weight. "Then we make them see more than fear. We show them who you really are." A flicker of something, hope, crossed her expression. "How?" A smirk tugged at his lips. "Leave that to me." The next day Ethan approached Captain Lorne in the command deck. "Captain, I need a favor." Lorne barely looked up. "If this is about your alien friend..." "It is. And she has a name." "Soraya." The captain exhaled sharply. "Ethan, the crew isn't ready. We have a mission to focus on. I can't force them to accept her." "No," Ethan said, "but you can give her a chance. She has skills no one else here does. We wouldn't have made it through the last jump without her calculations. Let her help in a real way." Publicly. Lorne considered him for a long moment before nodding. "One chance. That's all." Ethan grinned. "One is all she needs." Chapter 10. A Storm Within. 2 days later, the ship encountered a debris field, wreckage from an old battle drifting aimlessly between the stars. "Radiation spikes are fluctuating," Ensign Teller reported. "If we don't reroute, we might get caught in a surge." Lorne rubbed his temple. "Suggestions?" "Let Soraya handle the navigation," Ethan said immediately. The room fell silent. The crew exchanged glances. Lorne hesitated. Then finally he gestured. "Fine. Let's see what she's got." Soraya approached the console, ignoring the wary stares. Her fingers danced over the holographic interface, calculations scrolling rapidly. "Adjust course by 6 degrees to starboard and increase thrust by 15% for 7 seconds, she instructed. The helmsman hesitated. Lorne nodded. "Do it." The ship veered sharply. A tense few seconds passed before the warning lights dimmed. "Radiation levels stabilizing," Tella announced. "We're clear." A beat of stunned silence followed. Then a slow ripple of murmured acknowledgement filled the deck. Ethan turned to Soraya, who stood frozen. A hint of wonder flickered in her expression. "See," he whispered. "One chance was all you needed." And for the first time Soraya believed him. Chapter 11. The Trial of Unity. The silence in the grand chamber of Velthri was suffocating. Humans and Velthrin delegates sat in rows of bioluminescent chairs, their gazes locked on the two figures at the center. Dr. Elias Carter and Zalera, the outcast Velthrin woman with cybernetic enhancements that had rendered her an anomaly among her own people. "You stand before us accused of violating the sacred principles of genetic sanctity," intoned High Chancellor Verlon, his deep violet skin shimmering under the ceremonial lights. "No Velthrin has ever been permitted to alter their form beyond natural growth. Yet you, Zalera, exist in defiance of our ways. And worse, a human has chosen to bond with you. This is unprecedented." Zalera's mechanical limb twitched slightly, a sign of her unease. Elias stepped forward, his voice steady. "With all due respect, Chancellor, isn't it time the Velthrin evolve beyond their prejudices? Zalera is not broken. He is extraordinary. And your refusal to acknowledge that does not diminish her worth." A murmur spread through the chamber. Some of the younger Velthrin delegates exchanged uncertain glances, while the elder council members remained impassive. "A union between human and Velthrin has never been recorded," another elder stated. "Your actions threaten the integrity of our lineage. We cannot condone such defiance." Zalera's deep silver eyes burned with a mix of fury and sorrow. So you would rather cast me aside than accept that I have found love? Is our race so fragile that a single deviation threatens its very existence? Elias felt the weight of centuries pressing against them. You claim to be enlightened, but enlightenment does not come from exclusion. If the Velthrin wish to grow, to truly flourish in this new era of interstellar unity, then they must embrace those who are different. The chamber erupted in discussion, voices rising and overlapping. High Chancellor Verlon raised a hand commanding silence. Very well, he said. Since words alone cannot resolve this matter, we shall invoke the trial of unity. If your bond is strong enough to withstand the trials we place before you, we will reconsider our stance. But fail and Zalera will be permanently exiled. Zalera's jaw clenched, but she met Elias's gaze with determination. Then we accept. Chapter 12. The Test of Harmony. The trial of unity was not a simple test. It was a series of 3 trials designed to test physical endurance, mental synchronization, and emotional resilience. No outsider had ever undergone it. Elias and Zalera had mere hours to prepare. The first trial, the Gauntlet of Synergy, required them to navigate a shifting maze of energy barriers and mechanical drones. The key was synchronization. One misstep and the barriers would trap them, ending the trial immediately. Trust me, Zalera whispered as they entered the maze, their surroundings pulsating with shifting walls of light. Elias exhaled. Always. With practiced ease they moved in harmony, their steps mirroring one another's. Zalera's enhanced vision picked out patterns in the barriers, while Elias used his agility to maneuver through tight spaces. The Velthrin Council watched in tense silence as they cleared the maze in record time. The second trial was far more challenging. Known as the Mindshare Ordeal, it required them to link their minds through a neural interface, experiencing each other's memories and emotions without losing their sense of self. As the device activated, Elias gasped as he was suddenly submerged in Zalera's past. Her pain, her rejection, the countless days spent alone, longing for acceptance. At the same time, Zalera was overwhelmed by Elias's childhood memories on Earth, his struggles with loss and purpose. The sheer intensity of their shared emotions nearly broke them. But instead of recoiling, they reached for each other, holding on to the bond they had forged. When the trial ended, they emerged with tears in their eyes, but victorious. The final trial, the trial of devotion, was the simplest yet most profound. One of them had to willingly endure pain for the other, proving their selflessness. A blade of psionic energy hovered between them. Zalera did not hesitate. She stepped forward and grasped it, the energy burning into her palm. Elias rushed to stop her, but she held firm, her voice unwavering. I have suffered alone for so long. But with you, Elias, I would suffer 1,000 times over. The blade faded. The trial was complete. The chamber was silent for a long moment before High Chancellor Verlon finally spoke. You have passed. Against all odds, you have proven the strength of your bond. A wave of murmurs filled the room, but there was no denying the truth. The barriers between their species had begun to crack. As Elias and Zalera clasped hands, the first human Velthrin bond was recognized, not just as an anomaly but as a beacon of change. Chapter 13. A Fragile Alliance. As the station's artificial sun dimmed to simulate evening, Aaron sat across from Karin, their fingers lightly touching over the metallic table. The bond between them had deepened, yet the silence that stretched between them now carried an unspoken tension. You don't have to fight for me, Karin finally said, her mandibles clicking softly. I've survived this long without help. Aaron shook his head. Survival isn't the same as living. A knock at the door interrupted their moment. Captain Vetra, Karin's superior and one of the few in the Stari hierarchy who still tolerated her, stood there. Her expression was unreadable, but her rigid posture spoke volumes. You are summoned before the High Council, Vetra announced, directing her compound eyes at Karin. Your association with a human has drawn attention. Some seek your exile. Karin tensed. She had spent years barely clinging to her position, and now, because she had allowed herself a moment of connection, everything was at risk. Aaron stood beside her. Then we'll face them together. Vetra's mandibles twitched in what could have been amusement, or pity. Prepare yourselves. The High Council chamber was vast, its bioluminescent walls pulsing in time with the murmurs of the assembled Stari. At the center stood Councillor Yixtal, a staunch traditionalist who had opposed Karin's inclusion in the military from the start. You have consorted with an outsider, Yixtal accused. A human. Weak-fleshed. Unworthy. Aaron met the counselor's gaze without flinching. Karin is stronger than any of you. Not because of her body, but because she refuses to be defined by what you consider a weakness. The chamber erupted in hissing whispers. Karin felt her exoskeleton tighten. It was dangerous for a human to speak so boldly, yet Aaron refused to cower. Yixtal's multifaceted eyes studied them both before speaking. Then let us test this claim. A trial by ordeal. Karin stiffened. The trials were ancient, brutal. Designed to test physical prowess, they were never meant for one such as her. Aaron stepped forward. Then I will stand for her. The council's laughter was a chittering, clicking storm. A human. Against our champions? Yixtal sneered. Very well. Tomorrow at first light. Karin wanted to protest, but Aaron squeezed her hand. Trust me. She had no choice. Chapter 14. The Trial. The arena was a cavernous pit carved from the heart of the station. The gathered Sthari watched from above, their bioluminescence pulsing in anticipation. Aaron stood alone, unarmed, facing a towering Sthari warrior named Vroktil. You are not Sthari, Vroktil said, flexing his serrated limbs. You do not belong. Aaron smirked. I get that a lot. The gong sounded. Vroktil lunged, his forelimbs slicing through the air. Aaron ducked, barely avoiding decapitation. He rolled, scanning his surroundings. The Sthari prided themselves on strength and speed, but they underestimated adaptability. Karin watched from the edge, her heart pounding. Aaron wasn't the strongest, but he was clever. He used his smaller frame to weave around Vroktil's attacks, exploiting openings. Then Vroktil landed a hit. Aaron was thrown against the wall, blood seeping from his side. The crowd chittered in satisfaction. Karin clenched her fists. Enough. Silence fell. Even Yixtal turned in surprise. Karin stepped forward, her gait uneven but unyielding. Strength is not just muscle. It is resilience. It is knowing when to fight and when to stand together. Aaron struggled to his feet. She's right. He wiped blood from his lips. You think I'm weak because I'm human? Fine. But Karin has more strength than any of you because she refuses to give up. On herself or on me. The crowd murmured. Yixtal's mandibles twitched. Finally he waved a clawed hand. The trial is over. Karin's breath hitched. What? Yixtal's gaze was unreadable. You have proven your point. Vroktil stepped back, nodding once in acknowledgement. The gathered Sthari began to disperse, murmuring among themselves. Karin turned to Aaron, her mandibles trembling. You idiot. Aaron grinned through his pain. You're welcome. As she helped him away from the arena, she realized something. For the first time she was not alone. Chapter 15. The Fractured Alliance. The tension aboard the Horizon Dawn was thick enough to be carved into the ship's metal walls. After weeks of resistance, Rilia had finally been accepted into the crew, not by all, but by enough to carve out a fragile existence. And yet, that tenuous peace threatened to shatter the moment Captain Varro announced the next mission. We're approaching the Tariq outpost, he said, his voice a careful balance of authority and caution. We need to negotiate safe passage through their sector. Rilia stiffened at the mention of the Tariq. They were a predatory species, infamous for their disdain toward the weak. And in their eyes she, crippled and cast out from her own kind, would be the lowest of the low. I can assist with the negotiations, she offered, ignoring the sideways glances from some of the crew. My people have interacted with the Tariq before. I understand their customs. I don't think that's wise, Lieutenant Hale interjected. They'll see you as prey. She's not wrong, murmured another crew member. But before Rilia could snap back, Daniel, the only human who had ever truly seen her as more than an outcast, spoke up. We need every advantage we can get. If Rilia can give us insight, we should listen. The captain's gaze flickered between them before nodding. Fine. But if things go south, we pull out. That decision set the course for the most perilous encounter yet. The Tariq outpost was a sprawling station of metallic spires and smog-choked corridors. Their leader, a hulking figure named Warchief Korvash, regarded the approaching Horizon Dawn with something between amusement and hunger. The negotiations began predictably. The Tarek demanded tribute, resources, weapons, or bodies. Varro refused, countering with an offer of mutual trade and strategic cooperation. Corvash scoffed at the proposition, but his gaze landed on Rilia with predatory interest. You offer a broken one as your envoy, he growled. She should not even breathe among the strong. Rilia's heart pounded, but she held firm. Strength is not only in form, war chief, she said evenly. It is in survival. In resilience. Corvash let out a guttural laugh. Resilience? You would test that claim? And just like that she knew what he meant. The Tarek did not respect words alone. They respected trials. A test of survival. A challenge she could not refuse. Chapter 16. The Trial of Endurance. The challenge was brutal. A gauntlet through the depths of the Tarek station, where only the strongest emerged intact. No weapons, no outside assistance. Just cunning, willpower, and the ability to survive. Rilia stood in the dimly lit corridor as the trial began. Her prosthetic leg hummed softly as she shifted her weight, scanning her surroundings. Daniel had protested the challenge, but Rilia had silenced him with a single look. This was her battle. The first wave came quickly, Tarek warriors moving with practiced lethality. She barely dodged the first strike, rolling under a swinging blade before using the momentum to drive her elbow into her attacker's ribs. The impact rattled her frame, but she had no time to recover as another came from behind. She adapted. She had always adapted. Using the environment to her advantage, she led them into narrow corridors where their bulky forms struggled. She struck where they were weak, evading when she couldn't counter. Every step was agony, but she refused to fall. And then she reached the final stretch. A towering brute blocked her path, a blade gleaming in his claws. Unlike the others, he did not attack outright. That he spoke. You do not belong here, exile. Rilia met his gaze. I belong wherever I choose. The battle that followed was the most grueling of her life. He was stronger, faster, and unrelenting. But she was smarter. She forced him to overextend, dodging his blows until he tired. And then, with a final strike, using all the strength in her battered body, she drove a scavenged blade into his side. Silence followed as the brute collapsed. And then the warchief's laughter echoed through the chamber. She survives. Corvash bellowed. She earns her place. Rilia stood, breathing heavily as the realization sank in. She had won. Not just for herself but for her crew. For Daniel. For the first time she was more than just an outcast. He was a survivor. As she limped back onto the horizon dawn, Daniel was the first to meet her. He said nothing, just extended his hand. And for the first time she took it without hesitation. Together they stepped forward into the unknown.